Welcome to this session in which we're going to talk about the NHS Genomic Medicine Service. I'm Ellen Thomas, I'm a clinical geneticist and I work as the clinical director at Genomics England. I'm really delighted to be joined online today by Professor Dame Sue Hill, who is the Chief Scientific Officer for NHS England and NHS Improvement, and in the room by Dr. Richard Scott, who is the Chief Medical Officer at Genomics England. So I was wondering if we could start possibly by asking you, Sue, to really set the scene for us about the Genomic Medicine Service and about the infrastructure that's been set up over recent years.
Yes, thank you very much, Ellen. And it's great to be speaking at the Discovery Forum again. And I wonder if I could have as a backdrop my first slide, because we launched the Genomic Medicine Service in 2018, which followed really a review of genomic services in the NHS and also the successful NHS contribution to the 100,000 Genomes project. We have in 2018, when we launched the Genomic Medicine Service, at its core was 7 genomic laboratory hubs, so a consolidation of the laboratory infrastructure that had been there previously. So working together in a hub and spoke way and in a national network, delivering a nationally mandated genomic test directory, where they could order, or clinicians could order, whole genome sequencing for certain conditions, for 21 rare diseases and 3 real main cancer types, in a partnership with Genomics England, who secured the whole genome sequence provider, Illumina, provide the bioinformatic analysis, and when individual patients and family members consent or provide through their informed choice discussion consent, their data can enter into the trusted research environment that Genomics England curate and annotate, and where industry scientists and academics can have access. Importantly, this is wrapped round with a clinical genomic set of services, previously referred to as clinical genetics, 7 genomic medicine service alliances that I'll talk about a bit later, providing multi-professional clinical leadership, a relationship to Health Education England to develop the workforce, and within NHS England and Improvement, a genomics unit overseeing commissioning, the oversight of delivery, and reviewing performance. So I think I've talked through this, Ellen, and people can see on the next slide that through the Genomic Medicine Service, then clinicians can access the full breadth of genomic testing that's informed by horizon scanning, by at least annual evidence reviews to update the test directory, on where we are now rolling out into our phase 2 whole genome sequence conditions for both cancer, so including triple negative breast cancer and also high-grade serous ovarian cancer, and another 26 rare diseases. And you can see in the NHS it spans from single genes, a very targeted testing, up to sort of quite extensive panel testing. And that's particularly the case for cancer panel testing, where we've introduced sort of 500 gene panels, included targets, DNA and RNA targets, which are linked to all the available clinical trials and the medicines that are coming through the pipeline over the next 2 years. So I'll just stop there, Ellen.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Sue, for setting the scene for us. I wonder, Rich, whether you could tell us a bit about what Genomics England is, what role we're playing in the Genomic Medicine Service.
So, as Sue said, we work with the NHS to deliver part of that whole genome sequencing service that she's described, and that's building on the knowledge that we together built and the infrastructure from the 100,000 Genomes project, but taking that into now a diagnostic setting. So our technical systems, our infrastructure sits there to receive data from clinicians within the NHS, from those laboratory teams, and then to support the sequencing through the partnership with Illumina, and then the bioinformatics, so that we move from samples through to that really complex whole genome data set, through to something that then the PhD trained scientist in the NHS can then interpret that smaller number of variants to identify what has clinical impact. And our role in that is firstly to provide that infrastructure, to make sure that it is rock solid, ISO accredited, what would be expected by the NHS. It's also to work with the NHS teams and the best in science to make sure it's the best it can be. So for example, Sue mentioned bringing in some of the new waves of cancers, and one of the things we're working with Sue's team and people across the NHS is looking at bringing in, for example, high homologous recombination detection algorithms to see what value that can provide to the NHS, but also learning from what's happened in research, in our research environments, but also the best in terms of the knowledge out there. And then, so that's us providing a service, making sure it's cutting edge, it's keeping pace with what the NHS and what patients need. Tied to that, as Sue said, is the research element. So of those patients having that testing, we know that a very high proportion want their data to be available for research. And our job's not just then to make that data available, provide the right tools to make it accessible to maximise the impact, but it's also then to work with the NHS to feed those insights back into day-to-day care, whether that's for individual patients or whether it's more at system scale with, for example, the HRD algorithm being a really nice example where we're providing benefits to individual patients or something broader, but also then thinking through how we can embed clinical trials at scale where you need the genome to inform, for example, patient selection and so on, and working out how you really embed that with the teams in the NHS.
Great, thank you. And you've talked quite a bit there about the role of research in this ecosystem. And I know, Sue, that there is a genomic research collaborative which has been set up to help the NHS really drive the research which is going to really inform future patient care. I wonder if you might be able to tell us a little bit about the Genomic Research Collaborative and the role that it's playing.
Yeah, I wonder, Ellen, if I may go back to my slides a minute, because I just wanted to say just a couple of words about the Genomic Medicine Service alliances. And that slide was up previously, but I think it's just for people sort of viewing this session, is the alliances have a number of different remits. One of which is to make sure they can work with the new NHS system and the infrastructure, including regions and integrated care systems. The second is that they have the clinical leadership, multi-professional clinical leadership that includes having a research director that can facilitate not only research, but also the projects that I'll come on to in the research collaborative. And the third is that they can drive forward transformation projects. And for example, we've got transformation projects in familial hypercholesterolemia, in Lynch syndrome, for example, that's being driven across the whole of the NHS. And I want to make that point because it may be some of the people participating today may be interested in coming to NHS England about transformation projects. And the third is that ongoing workforce development. But my next slide was going to set out really the research collaborative, which is a collaborative between that Genomic Medicine Service infrastructure, Genomics England, and also supported by NIHR and other partners. And the important part of this is driving an ecosystem where healthcare itself, through the provision of data, genomic data, clinical data, can support research and industry and other endeavours, and so support that innovation pathway from discovery through to transformation, adoption of relatively small projects to gather the real world evidence into spread and linked and alignment with the commissioning system. And that circle actually is fed by sort of evidence. And then the whole purpose of the research collaborative is for academics and for industry to bring a range of different projects to the table to enable the NHS to consider whether these are projects that can be supported through that genomic medicine service infrastructure in the partnerships that I've outlined.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Sue. And Rich, I wonder if you've got any examples of the sorts of projects that are being brought to that research collaborative so far.
So there are a range of things happening. Actually, on Sue's last slide, it spoke a little bit about some of the specific diagnoses that are already being fed back, and that process is being overseen by the research collaborative. We often refer to this as diagnostic discovery. What it means in practice at the moment is more than 140 families have received diagnoses because of research activity in the research environment by whether it's academics or industry. That can be fed back first to the NHS laboratories so that they can go through that same process that one would go through if it were delivered by the primary bioinformatics algorithm, and then back to families in clinic. And so that means, for example, for me as a clinician in the NHS, diagnoses that I can provide for families that I wouldn't otherwise have been able to. There are some other categories that of research that we've been discussing at the Research Collaborative and supporting. So, for example, part of our consent model offers recontact for potential resampling, recruitment to other research programs. So, for example, we've been working with one of our industry partners and with academia, thinking about recontact for samples in certain participants, for example, for stem cell creation, and something that is going to be, I think, in the future, a really important use case, one that we need to work through how we facilitate in practice. And thirdly, thinking about how we begin to embed clinical trials. And I think this is one of the places where I see the Research Collaborative as really exciting, and the infrastructure that Sue and the team have built, because we're beginning to get approaches about studies which would naturally have happened in one or two really excellent academic centres, where now we have the potential to say, how can we make this happen nationwide? So there's accessibility for potential participants in the programmes, wherever they are in the country, and also in terms of researchers, making sure that they have as broad reach as possible.
Yep. So perhaps we'll move on to some of the questions that we've got coming in from our online audience now. So we've got a question from Pierre regarding gene panel data, about what data is going to be available in GEL's trusted research environment. So I don't know, Sue, if we've still got your connection there, whether you would be able to comment a little bit about plans for gene panel data and its use in the research context.
At the moment, the panel data, it will be within the NHS and within our NHS Genomic Laboratory hubs. And that's why the Research Collaborative is a way of accessing that data. But we are working closely with Genomics England to further develop the informatics underpinning platform so that it will include the ability for the trusted research environment to have both panel data and other non-WGS data if patients provide their informed consent, as well as whole genome sequencing. And in some instances, the panel data will accompany whole genome sequencing or whole exomes that have been performed within the NHS. So there is a plan to do that, but in the short term, it would be working with the NHS. And a really good example of what we've been doing is with the NTRK sort of gene fusion inhibitors, so-called referred to as histology-independent drugs. We've got a transformation project that actually supports the rollout of that. And through our Genomic Medicine Service alliances, we're making sure that the amount, of people with cancer are being tested for NTRK gene fusions. And so that we can increase the number of people who can access these therapies. We know we have about 20 lung cancer medicines that are being discussed with NHS E&I at the moment. And we will have still that same arrangements that supports the regulatory and licensing of these medicines as we move forward, and the approval by NICE, as we did with the histology independent treatments.
Thank you very much, Sue. And I think in rare disease there are also some examples where we, with the increased number of genome sequencing indications, we have an increased number of clinical situations in which the data will be coming into that research environment. But there are other conditions where we know that probably for a while in the NHS the most appropriate test will be a gene panel test, and a lot of those are in conditions with inherited cancer or a lot of the cardiac conditions. And I think those are areas where we are all as an ecosystem very much aware of the benefits of sharing that data around the country in order to inform both our clinical and diagnostic interpretations, and also be able to carry out crucial research into those relatively much more common sorts of inherited disorders. So that feels like the sort of rare disease equivalent of the things that you were just mentioning on the cancer side.
I think that's one of the things where I guess it's about taking a holistic view in general, just as the sort of the vision for genomics in the UK has taken that step right at the beginning, sort of saying, this is about healthcare and research. It's about it working when they work together. Just in the same way, thinking about how when we're thinking about utility in specific cancers or specific rare diseases, we're thinking not just about the diagnostics for today, but we're also recognizing that embedding clinical trials, making sure the very latest technologies or treatments are available is absolutely part of that holistic picture that patients and participants expect. They don't expect the two to be separate, and I think that's where we're really fortunate, both in the vision from government, but also the NHS. So putting those two together at a national scale is so unusual.
Absolutely, and I guess the process of having done the 100,000 Genomes project jointly together as a joint project that was delivered by the NHS in partnership with Genomics England and with strong input from our participants is also the foundations on which this genomic medicine service is really resting, as Sue was saying earlier. So we've got some more questions from our online audience, which I'd like to get to. So. Rich, a question for you. How does GEL ensure that data and research flow smoothly between clinical and commercial partners so that information can be fed back quickly but without compromising on consent and confidentiality? Which is a question that I know we've spent many happy hours discussing because of its importance. Absolutely.
So, you've heard from Sue and probably earlier about the sort of the tenets that sort of support us here. On the one hand, we are very clear that we need to make this work at pace and at speed to deliver what patients and participants want. They want sort of diagnoses fast. They want access to clinical trials that will potentially benefit them. They want the best treatments. At the same time, we need to make sure we're absolutely abiding by those other things that our same patients and participants expect, which is absolute clarity about who should have access to data and for what purposes, what they do with it, and protection of, for example, having for example, identifiable data only housed and available to NHS users who are involved in their care, and our research environments being de-identified, and following this research library visiting the data model. So work with our participants. In fact, the next section of this is talking about how we've engaged over the years with our participants on the model for how, for example, we build consent, but also how we govern who should have access for data, but also how we sort of oil these cogs of getting those two sides of our infinity loop working really well together. And a lot of it, and it comes back to some of the really good discussions we're having with the Research Collaborative at the moment, to some of the sort of real day-to-day challenges within a busy NHS. So looking, for example, at do we need people with specific roles within these GMSAs that can support response and feedback of findings rapidly? And I think it's sort of getting really stuck into that nitty-gritty, as well as then thinking what the sort of tech platforms we need to have so that we can do this really efficiently and where appropriate, take out manual steps.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that has struck me as we've been having these conversations is the immense enthusiasm that we see really on both sides of that loop that we saw on Sue's slides earlier, that where both the researchers in academia and industry are working on the data, and also in the NHS where clinicians are returning diagnoses to patients and looking after the healthcare of those patients. We see a huge enthusiasm for that cross work to really work, and despite the different pace and the different incentives that we see people working with on both sides of that loop, there is a huge wish to make this work efficiently from all sides, and I think that's one of the things that really drives us to make this work well, because of that great enthusiasm from all sides. Just before we end, I'd just like to see whether anybody in the room wanted to ask us any questions on this occasion. I think we do have a microphone if there's anything that's come up that anybody in the room wanted to pick up with us. Otherwise, we can go back to our online questioners for some final thoughts. Great. So the final question, I think that we'll look at is about how GEL and the NHS and industry are supporting the training that both research and clinical healthcare professionals need to fit this into their busy schedules and understand the importance of recruiting to genomic research studies. So I think the answer to this question would lie quite a lot in Health Education England. Rich, I don't know if you'd like to sort of talk us through a little bit the relationship we have with them.
Yeah, that's right. And apologies to people who are sort of watching online. I think Sue's connection is poor, and so I think this is one that Sue would predominantly answer. But let's sort of set out some of the approach and background. So, as you say, Ellen, Health Education England, which has got a sort of a long history working with us at Genomics England and is part of the NHS family, has invested over the last few years on sort of genomics education more broadly, and that's thinking about upskilling the workforce in general, making sure that genomics in its right form is in the right curriculums. It's also about the MSc courses that have been established, but also increasingly sort of just-in-time information that can really support this. And I think, again, part of Sue's infrastructure that she talked through, the GMSAs, having a responsibility there for education locally of the workforce to make sure that people are upskilled enough will make a real difference to it being delivered in practice. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose one reflection is that the question asks about clinicians understanding the importance of patient recruitment to the studies, but actually I think what we've seen is that both patients and clinicians very much appreciate the importance of research and of participation in research. And certainly I would say that the appreciation of the importance doesn't feel like a big barrier, no. And the education is very much around how we use this information in order to get the maximum benefit for patients out of the Genomic Medicine Service. So I'm going to close this part of today's session there and thank Sue, sadly in her absence, for her participation, and Rich for his participation in this session. And I'm going to hand over to Vivienne Parry, who is going to introduce the second half of the session. Thank you very much.